Jason Miller, thank you for joining us. I've been following your activities across Europe, you and your team, as you promote and talk about GETTR here at in the European markets. Can you tell me a little bit about those experiences, what you've learned about the unavoidable differences among the countries and markets that you've visited?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me. And I think the work that you're doing with the European Conservative is very important now more than ever. And this might seem a little bit cliche, but actually I've found that the more that you start going into different countries, the more a lot of our common experiences are the same. You know, I formerly worked for President Trump in both 2020 and 2016. And in the post-presidency phase in early 2021, I started sitting down with a number of folks who were starting to launch platforms, or at least come to President Trump hat in hand, asking him to fund their various efforts. And that's when I came across the GETTR folks and their engineers and their two investment funds that were getting behind it. So I initially came into it through a very myopic, US-centered kind of Trump ally space. I don't have a long traditional career in, say, in the free speech movement or necessarily even in the tech movement. I saw things through the lens of someone who had a front row seat with President Trump. But as I started doing my homework and I started doing the research, whether we're talking about what President Bolsonaro is facing in Brazil, we talk about what Prime Minister Modi is facing in India, when we talk about everybody is facing in Germany at the moment, because you have the German government, even on top of what the EU is doing. This is even before any of the Ukraine conflict, that everybody is going through these really hard fought debates and regulatory discussions or love taps, depending if you're on the wrong end of them, where our free speech rights are getting narrower and narrower. And over this last year or two, it really has all been under the guise of COVID. But what we found is COVID is kind of just become a placeholder for how can we go and exercise more control. Right. And we see in Canada with Justin Trudeau, is he starts going with the seizing of banks. We see in Australia, I think our friends in Australia were just let out of their houses a week or two ago. They've effectively been locked in their homes for a while. New Zealand's basically been shut off from the entire world. And then we see literally what's happened in Russia, where obviously they just seize any aspect of a free and fair democratic election. COVID has given governments an excuse all around the world to take away our liberties and our freedoms. Okay. And what starts off as a small thing, hey, I said that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan. Okay, now Twitter or Facebook will sentence you to digital jail. It starts small, but then next thing you know, they deplatform a sitting president of the United States. And then next thing you know, they're picking winners and losers for who can even operate in what countries.
Right. It's been astonishing. But even though some people are waking up to these realities, these cold, harsh realities, the vast majority still seem to be under some kind of assumption that it's all for the common good, for our good. How do you explain that? Are they just simply getting the wrong news from the wrong outlets?
Largely, but you know, the world has become so polarized and so divided that you have roughly, you can go to almost any country on the planet and say 40% will have one perspective, 30 or 40%, 30 or 40% will have the opposite perspective, and then other people are in the middle, somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, although that middle space is really becoming pretty narrow in many of these countries, where you kind of have the two sides of the coin, and that's it. I mean, even when you talk about some of the the more parliamentarian or coalition based governments where you have multiple parties, you still are having people take a look and saying, well, wait a minute, my perspective is not allowed, or my perspective is discussed with regard to media. And I think most people, unless you're actually having your rights taken away, you kind of probably don't care. You're probably busy worrying about how much it costs to fill up your car with gas. Maybe you're paying attention to bigger things, you know, the family and schools and education, or trying not to get COVID. Those are all things they're paying attention to. But as I tell my friends on the political left, hey guys, it's only a matter of time until the free speech pendulum swings back the other direction. And then you wonder why you're now getting kicked off of social media because you refuse to conform. And again, it doesn't even have to be something that's, dancing on the railroad tracks of safety or conventional thought. Take a look at American rapper Nicki Minaj. Certainly, she's not some right of center activist. She raised a question about the COVID vaccine. She gets locked out of social media. So it's the cancel culture and wokeness doesn't stop for anybody.
Right, and it's universal, right? So let me ask you, you've gone to innumerable countries in the Western Hemisphere, across Europe. Are you finding the same kind of frustration among not only conservatives, but just among people who like freedom of speech, who want to be able to say their say in public?
So this is an answer that I give, and not in a flippant sense, but so many countries and so many citizens of countries have already had their rights taken away that they don't realize what they've lost. One of the things, and again, I have a traditional background in American politics. I didn't realize, for example, until I went to Brazil and was detained for several hours by their Supreme Court. Brazil doesn't have a First Amendment, not in the literal sense, because of course they have their own constitution. Brazil doesn't have a freedom of speech provision in their constitution the way we do in the United States. And so even talking with the deputy Carol Detoni, who's drafting their legislation and trying to get it introduced, it just blew my mind and really woke me up to the fact that so many countries around the world, they wouldn't even know what to do with the First Amendment. It'd be so much freedoms. And that's the thing, that as Americans, we take the First Amendment for granted every day. We have no idea as Americans what we have and the greatness we have with the country and our rights. We take it all for granted, and it's really a shame.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I've traveled most of my life because of my parents' jobs as educators, and I've lived in a lot of different countries. And people always say, well, boy, that must make you a globalist, or you must think global, you're globally minded. And I say, actually, no. The more you travel, the more you learn about other countries, the more you come back home to the United States and you realize, wow, there's something special here. Now, we don't have time to get into the whole discussion about American exceptionalism, which is fascinating, and we'll have to do that in person. But let me ask you the following. Have you met with resistance in any markets? Have you found that some people are hard to convince, say in France, for example, because the platform might be in English, or are you considering ways around any cultural kind of challenges in different markets?
Yeah, great question. And I can go through a couple of them. One of the early challenges we had was just coming up with content for those languages and countries where we're expanding to. So we had President Bolsonaro, who joined the platform before we even launched in Brazil. But until we had some Portuguese content, then there just wasn't that high of a usage. We had some of those initial challenges both in France and in Germany. But as we started to onboard different people who host YouTube shows, who have digital newsletters, things like that, as we've added news outlets, that's one of the big things. I did some market research early and really found that the two main reasons why people go to social media is to connect with friends and family and for breaking news. And so I put a massive priority in the early months of just getting news outlets. They might not be the biggest, they might not be the flashiest, but we need to have news outlets that can produce breaking news, who are going to be viewed as legitimate news outlets to produce breaking news. So people feel like, okay, I can get my information flowed, and we do this. Now we've started to ramp up. And I'll tell you, one of the things we're starting to be proven right here is I went and sat down with Eric Zemmour in France prior to him even launching his campaign. And I told him, I said, Mr. Zemmour, I got to tell you, it's a matter of when, not if, you and your allies are going to be kicked off of social media as you approach the first election. And trust me, by the second election, when they see you as a threat, they're going to find every excuse they can. Literally just this last week, Generation Z, all of these different online allies of Eric Zemmour's were kicked off of Twitter, and no reasons given, no answers. And so now a lot of the Zemmour folks have come back and said, you know what, you're exactly right. We're glad that we built out a following. In fact, Eric Zemmour is our largest user in France. So if he was ever kicked off himself, he has a backup. He doesn't have to start from scratch saying, hey, folks, there's this brand new platform. We've been there, we've been putting in the work, but we're going to continue to do that. In fact, a couple of things, just as you talked about being both in Budapest and in Vienna, we're looking obviously to increase our German content. Right now, the US is the biggest, followed by Brazil, followed by the UK, and only by a couple thousand users. Germany is number 4. In fact, some days it's actually ahead of the UK for number 3, number 4, and then France, of course, being in the 5th spot. We're constantly adding additional news outlets and people can generate content so people feel at home in their native language.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this news component or news dimension, because as I had said during our introduction, one of the things we're trying to do with the European Conservative is ramp up or bulk up our news content. And it's really exploding. The more we put out there, the more we grow exponentially almost. But the other thing I want to say is that I have to sort of eat crow here, because years ago, there were a few years where I was going around saying, objective news doesn't exist. It's over. It's all opinion journalism and data market services. And I've changed my tune. I've realized, conservatives need to get involved in news reporting, good old fashioned, investigative reporting, hunting down people and data and information and reporting it. And that's what you're doing, it seems. And it's also working miraculously, wonderfully for you, isn't it?
Now, it is, and this is where we have both. Obviously, there's for lack of a better term, the post, the microblogging type feature, where different news outlets, and again, it can be in a whole host of languages. I probably do 2 or 3 calls a day with different news outlets all around the world of saying, come and join our platform, whether it's in Spanish or Portuguese or French, German, or even this morning I was on the television in India, as that's one of our growth markets for this quarter. But as we continue to go and grow this, people are also adding in then the live streaming dynamic. They're having their shows. In fact, we just launched this past week a German comedy show, which in itself kind of made me laugh. When they came and said, we have a German comedy show, I was like, guys, is there anyone funny in Germany? Like that, you guys do some things that are really good. I've never heard anyone say German in comedy. There are actually some pretty good German comedians, but they said, hey, you know what? We want to launch this. We think we can actually draw people to the platform and check it out. It kicked off to a big, massive success this last week. And so we're starting to branch out into different aspects of content. So now, and this is the cool thing, it's not even just politics. It's people who just have this looming sense that big tech is controlling their daily lives, that 3 billionaires in Silicon Valley are kind of the new governments, so to speak, the thought police, and they just want that freedom, even if they're not big time political people.
Yeah, right. Now, GETTR and the European Conservative, you and I, and probably most of our friends have probably been accused at least once of being right-wingers or extreme right or whatnot. That happens to us a lot here in Europe. And I imagine it's happened to you in your travels across Europe. How do you respond to such accusations? And mind you, sometimes they come from right-wingers themselves, right, who don't want to be associated with other right-wingers, which I find astonishing. But how do you respond to that?
Yeah, another great question, because I make no bones about the fact that I'm a conservative Republican here in the United States. I've worked for Donald Trump in 2 presidential elections. I've been active in American politics for the last 25 years. So
and may God
I'm the
bless your service.
I'm the last person who tried to reinvent who we are, and I wear it on my sleeve. I'm a conservative Republican. However, the thing that I can say is that we're going to protect everyone's free speech rights, the exact same. And when it comes to moderation, we do have a proactive and robust moderation platform to prevent against, say, illegal activity, whether it's threatening physical harm or doxing people or threats to go and do different things, or child pictures or things of that nature. Of course, we go and work with local governments and their respective laws to make sure that we abide by that. So I tell people that, hey, we're going to protect the political left just in the same way we protect the political right. In fact, if anything, that's good. When I get people on the political left, you might appreciate this. We had the Southern Poverty Law Center that joined GETTR. Now, a number of my allies were, this is terrible. What are they doing? I'm like, no, guys, this is great, because then we can say that we're full spectrum. We have everyone on board. And look, they might be crazy, but guess what? They're on our platform and they're entitled, as long as they abide by our terms of service. I even sent out a welcome and said, hey, head of the Southern Poverty Law Center, welcome to GETTR, where your free speech rights are protected just the same as everybody's. And some of my conservative friends, their heads exploded and said, how could you say that? I'm like, look, you can't have free speech for some, but not for everybody. You got to treat people the same when it comes to their free speech, or when it comes to, say, their moderation, and making sure that people are abiding by terms of service. So I usually say that. And then the other thing too is, quite frankly, just getting out and 90% of it is showing up. And so if you show up and you're taking the tough questions, willing to sit down with everybody, they realize, okay, we can't paint you into some kind of weird corner when they sit down and realize that you're taking this very seriously.
Right. I was smiling when you were explaining all that or saying all that, because I was thinking of the old adage, hold your friends close, but your enemies even closer. So you just bring them in, you get them involved, you show that there's nothing really to hide, and that we're the ones on the right, strangely, I think, that are defending free discussion, open discussion, vigorous debates, and exchanges of viewpoints, right? So it's amazing. It's a topsy-turvy world.
No, it really is, and I think that is heated as things are becoming. One of the things I really love about GETTR is, especially with our translate feature that we have, where it's right there at the bottom of every post. If you're signed up for a language that's different, or if you're reading a post in a language that's different from what you signed up for, I interact with people from different countries and in different languages more in a single day than I probably did in the previous 10 years before I launched GETTR. And that's because what I found is there are these people who are facing the same challenges from big tech or from out of control governments who are feeling the same way that we are. They might not identify as a Tory or a Republican, or maybe they have completely different visions of who their party is or who they identify with. But what they know is that their free speech rights are being constricted. And so, who would have thought that it would have been, say, center right free speech advocates who are actually doing more to bring the world together in a time like this than anyone on the political left who kind of run around and try to get people kicked off of social media rather than trying to find a way to bring people together. So it's kind of cool to be able to say that we're leading the charge here for free speech for everybody.
You know, much like you, though on a smaller level, every day I'm interacting with writers or editors, contributors in different countries, sometimes in different languages, using DeepL and other translators, etc. And sometimes I stick my head up and I look at my wife and I say, you know, we're the multiculturalists. We are truly the people who are living that thing that they used to talk about being internationally minded and being diverse and tolerant. It's incredible. It's really, I mean, not to pat ourselves on our back, but as you were saying, it's like a lot of people have to be reminded that we're the ones on the side of everything that they want to defend, and it has nothing to do with political ideology anymore. It's just about being a good human being contributing to, you know, civil discourse. I have one final question for you. Okay, and this has been really a lot of fun. We're at 22 minutes. My final question is kind of the big one that is kind of started off on when we introduced ourselves to each other. What is, how would you describe GETTR's role and the role of other social media platforms out there that are disrupting things in the work of saving the West?
Yeah, and so when I think about protecting Western civilization and this defense of Western civilization, nothing else is more important. This is literally something that I wake up thinking about every day. Not only is this at a say kind of a value set when we talk about how Western values and the things that bring us together, whether it be whether it be family units, whether it be speech rights, whether it be kind of these broader democratic ideals. There's protecting that, which we are concerned about, but also then we see more at even a kinetic engagement or cyber warfare, different things of this nature, where literally the aggression from China is something that threatens the future of Western civilization. And we have a number of people, we have thousands of people that are on GETTR who are Chinese expats who oppose the CCP and want to embrace freedom. And they've gotten out of mainland China, and they're glad to be places where their traditional democratic thought. But it's a real slippery slope when you see the expansion. The CCP is trying to make everything from the debt diplomacy to the that we're seeing even in Eastern and Central Europe as they're pushing in all over the world. We see it with the kinetic warfares. We see Russia obviously invading and killing innocent Ukrainians in an hourly by hourly basis. Our Western way of life is under constant threat. And this isn't some theoretical debate. This isn't, we're not sitting around in some academia symposium, wondering, what would John Locke think about these matters. These are real deal fundamental beliefs that big tech want to take away from us, that these multinational governmental groups such as the EU, or heaven forbid, even the UN, fortunately they don't have too much power, but what little they have, they find a way to goof up, or the WHO, the WTO, some of these entities without even going into some crazy rabbit hole, those groups, even by their definitions, are not bolstering democracy, they're crushing it. But I'm very concerned about the rise of China. They literally have their plans for the 2035, 2049, the 100-year anniversary. They have their plans for world domination. This isn't, again, Dr. Evil. They've put in a plan, and and it's posted on the web, and you can find it. And if you can read Mandarin, then you can go through and see it. But our very value set, what we hold dear as people in the West with democratic thought and ideals, is under constant threat. And that's why I think GETTR is so critical to be in that vanguard to protect us.
Right. So I think more of us should wake up. We better wake up to the realities of what's going on all around us, little by little. Jason Miller, thank you. And you heard the man, join GETTR and save the West, basically. Jason, thank you so much. I hope we can talk again, maybe in person someday.
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing you shortly.